The winter of 1904 settled over St. Catherine's Convent like a benediction whispered in the dark. Snow lay thick across the Colorado Valley, muffling the world into a silence so complete it felt holy. Inside the stone chapel, beside a crackling fire that threw dancing shadows across whitewashed walls, two women sat facing each other across a gulf of years and understanding. Sister Abigail Thorne was 84 years old. Her hair had gone white as the snow outside pulled back beneath a simple veil. Her hands, resting on the arms of her chair, bore the marks of a life spent working, praying, and doing things she would never fully confess. The skin was thin now, spotted with age, but the fingers remained steady. They had not trembled in 30 years. Across from her sat Sister Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, recent arrival to the convent, still wearing the uncertainty of someone who had not yet found peace. She had been an army nurse. Before that, other things. Her eyes carried shadows that had nothing to do with the firelight. Sarah had been staring at the wall above the altar for the better part of an hour. There, mounted on simple wooden pegs, hung a Winchester rifle. Old, weathered. The barrel showed rust in places, despite careful maintenance. The stock bore the pale scars of years and weather. It looked like something that belonged in a museum or a scrap heap, not above the altar of a house of God. Finally, she could not contain the question any longer. "You want to know why that rifle hangs above the altar?" Sister Abigail's voice carried easily through the quiet chapel, still strong, despite her years. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. "Because everyone talks about it, but no one dares ask. They fear the answer." Abigail's eyes drifted toward the window, where snow continued to fall in the gathering darkness. "Or perhaps they fear the person I used to be." "Sit, child. I will tell you about the 49 souls, and why that weapon is both curse and salvation." The old woman settled deeper into her chair, and her gaze turned inward, seeing through the veil of decades to a time when her hands were steadier, her purpose murkier, and the weight of violence still fresh upon her shoulders. The screen of memory shimmered, and time folded backward to 1874, to a morning when Sister Abigail Thorne was 54 years old, kneeling in the convent garden with dirt under her fingernails and death riding toward her on the wind. November 11th, 1874. St. Catherine's Convent stood small and stubborn in a valley where the Colorado Territory met the sky. The stone chapel rose like a prayer from the earth, its walls thick enough to hold back winter. Beside it, a wooden dormitory housed 8 small rooms. A vegetable garden stretched along the southern exposure, and a well marked the center of the courtyard. A low wooden fence ringed the property, more symbolic than defensive, a marker of sanctuary that meant everything to those who understood and nothing to those who did not. Sister Abigail worked the soil that morning, planting winter herbs, rosemary and sage, hardy things that could survive the coming cold. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, pressing seeds into earth, covering them, moving on. She wore the simple gray habit of her order sleeves pushed back to her elbows despite the chill. A rosary hung from her belt, and within arm's reach, leaning against the chapel wall like an unwelcome relative at a family gathering, stood the old rifle. The weapon looked worse the longer you studied it. Rust freckled the barrel. The stock showed deep weathering where sweat and sun had taken their due over decades of use. The sling buckle, dull with age, rested against the wood. Every time the wind shifted, it made the faintest tick. Metal kissing timber. That small sound was the only thing close to company. Sister Abigail did not look at the gun often, but she never let it stray far from reach. Some habits once formed in blood, in necessity, could not be unlearned by prayer alone. The morning smelled of dry earth and cold stone in the peculiar stillness that comes before change. Somewhere beyond the fence, a crow called once and fell silent. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of distance, of open land, of something approaching. She saw the dust first. It rose thin as smoke on the eastern road, pulsing with the rhythm of hoofbeats not yet audible. Sister Abigail stopped working. Her hands remained in the soil, but her attention sharpened in ways that had nothing to do with gardening and everything to do with survival. She counted without thinking. 5 horses, maybe 6. The dust pattern told her they were moving with purpose, not wandering. Her eyes tracked to the dormitory window where Sister Mary Grace lay dying. 78 years old, wasted by illness, clinging to life with the same stubborn grace she had shown in all things. The other sisters, Ruth and Constance, had ridden to town 3 days ago for medicine. They would not return until evening, which meant Sister Abigail stood alone. She wiped her hands on her habit and stood slowly, joints protesting the movement. 54 years pressed against her bones with increasing weight each season. The military training that had once felt like second nature now required conscious effort to summon. But it came when called. It always came. Her mind performed calculations without her bidding. Distance 800 yards in closing. Number of riders 5 distinct dust trails. Terrain advantage none. The convent sat low in the valley. Anyone approaching held the high ground until they descended into the courtyard. Ammunition 6 rounds in the Winchester, 12 more in the leather pouch hanging inside the chapel door. Sightlines adequate from the chapel steps, poor from anywhere else. She did not reach for the weapon yet. Not yet. But her body remembered where it leaned, the exact number of steps required to claim it, the weight and balance and deadly purpose of the thing. Lord, not today. The prayer formed silently as she watched the dust draw nearer. Mary Grace is dying. She cannot hear gunfire. Not now. But her hand was already moving toward the Winchester, even as the prayer faded unfinished. Because some things were beyond prayer. Some things required older answers. The memory came unbidden, sharp as broken glass. Mexico, 1848. She had been 28 years old wearing a man's uniform because the army did not permit women to fight. She had cropped her hair short, bound her chest, deepened her voice, and lied about everything except her ability to shoot. The deception had lasted 8 months before a camp doctor discovered the truth. By then she had 17 confirmed kills and a reputation that made her more valuable than proper. The officer's voice echoed across the decades. Thorn target 300 yards crosswind from the right. She had been young, Abigail then, not sister, not burdened by the weight of conscience that would come later. She had simply raised the gun, adjusted for wind and distance, and fired. The Mexican soldier fell without ever knowing death approached. The officer nodded once. Confirmed kill. Mark it in the log. She had lowered the weapon and said nothing. There was nothing to say. She had done what the moment required. Only later, years later, would she understand that each confirmed kill confirmed something in her as well. Something cold. Something necessary. Something that would take decades in the intervention of a saint among women to even begin to heal. The present crashed back as the riders crested the final rise. 5 of them, as she had counted. They moved with the easy confidence of men who did not expect resistance. They rode good horses, well-fed despite the season. Their clothes marked them as mountain men trappers, the sort who lived in the high country and came down only when need or greed drove them. Sister Abigail's breath came steady and slow as she watched them approach the gate. She did not call out, did not wave, simply stood on the chapel steps with her hands folded before her in the posture of prayer, while 40 years of military training cataloged every detail of the threat assembling in her courtyard. The lead rider dismounted first. Tall, perhaps 6 feet 2 inches broad through the shoulders. He wore a bearskin coat despite the moderate cold more statement than necessity. His beard was thick and unkempt, his eyes sharp beneath the shadow of a fur hat. His right hand never strayed far from the pistol on his hip. His left gripped the reins with the casual strength of someone accustomed to controlling large animals and smaller men. 38, maybe 39 years old, a man in his prime. Caleb Stone. She did not know his name yet, but she would remember it. Behind him came a younger man, leaner, quicker in his movements. Brothers, she guessed from the similarity in their features. The younger one's eyes held a mean brightness, the kind that came from too much whiskey and too little consequence. His mouth curved into a smirk as he studied the convent, finding it wanting. Perhaps 26, 27, old enough to know better, young enough not to care. The third man was built like a landslide waiting to happen. 250 pounds at least, most of it muscle gone to early fat. He carried a large hunting knife on his belt and moved with the rolling gait of someone who had spent more time on mountains than level ground. His eyes were small and calculating, already measuring exits and advantages. 42, maybe 43. A man who had survived by being harder than everything around him. The fourth rider sat his horse quietly watching everything, saying nothing. Older than the others, perhaps 36 or 37, a tracker, Sister Abigail thought. Someone who read sign and survived by noticing what others missed. His eyes found hers and held, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition, perhaps, or wariness. The last rider was barely more than a boy, 19, maybe 20. Too young for the company he kept, too frightened to hide it well. His hands gripped the reins too tightly, and his horse sensed the tension, tossing its head and stepping nervously. 5 men, 1 woman. A convent with 3 feet of stone in the chapel walls and nothing but wooden planks everywhere else. The mathematics were simple and ugly. The older brother stepped forward, easy smile on his face, hands visible and empty. The smile did not reach his eyes. "Morning, sister." His voice carried the rough edges of mountains and campfires. "Winter's coming on hard. We find ourselves in need of supplies." Sister Abigail remained motionless on the chapel steps, hands still folded. "The convent shares with those in need. You need only ask." The younger brother laughed sharp and mocking. "We ain't asking, sister. We're taking." His eyes drifted past her to the Winchester, leaning against the chapel wall, and his laugh grew louder. He pointed at the old gun with exaggerated disbelief. "What's that doing here? A nun with a gun?" He turned to his companions, still laughing. "And look at the rust on that thing. Looks like it was pulled from a scrap heap." The big man grinned, showing teeth stained brown from tobacco. "That piece of junk probably can't even fire anymore." Sister Abigail's gaze shifted from the men to the weapon and back again. Her expression did not change. Her hands remained folded, but her voice, when it came, carried a quality that had not been there before. Something colder, something certain. "It fires, and I know how to use it." The words dropped into the courtyard like stones into still water. The ripples spread outward in silence. The younger brother's smile faltered. The tracker's eyes narrowed. Even the boy stopped fidgeting with his reins. Only the older brother seemed unfazed. He studied Sister Abigail with new interest, as if seeing her for the first time. "That's so." His tone remained pleasant, but tension gathered beneath it like a storm building over distant peaks. "Well, sister, we're reasonable men. We just need some help getting through the winter. Food, blankets, maybe some of that silver I hear convents keep in their chapels." Sister Abigail's hands unfolded slowly. She did not reach for the gun, not yet. But the movement was deliberate, a statement. "Food and blankets you may have. We serve those in need, but sacred vessels remain sacred. They do not pass into profane hands. That is God's law." The younger brother took a step toward the chapel door. Sister Abigail moved to block his path with movements that were neither hurried nor hesitant. She simply appeared between him and the entrance, as if the space had folded to accommodate her will. "You will not enter." The young man stopped, surprised into stillness. Then anger flooded his features, hot and immediate. His hand dropped toward the pistol at his side. "You gonna stop me?" The courtyard held its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called again, harsh and lonely. The wind picked up, lifting dust and small devils that danced between the horses and the humans, in the terrible space where decisions crystallize into action. Sister Abigail did not answer with words. Her body simply knew what came next. The younger man's hand touched the grip of his pistol leather, whispering against metal. In that whisper lived all the permission her training required. Her right hand moved before conscious thought could intervene. 3 steps to the Winchester. Her fingers closed around wood worn smooth by decades of use. The old gun came up with the weight of memory and muscle knowledge, too deep to forget. The lever dropped once, a sound that seemed to fill the entire valley. Click, clack, metal against metal, a round chambering, the sound of inevitability. She raised the barrel, not dramatically, not with flourish, just enough. The weapon settled against her shoulder like an old promise she had never wanted to keep but could not break. The younger man looked up from his partial draw, confusion, crossing his face first, then irritation, then the faintest flicker of doubt. He did not understand what he was seeing. A nun, an old woman, a rusted rifle. The mathematics did not add up to danger in his mind. Sister Abigail exhaled slowly, letting the air leave her lungs in a controlled release. She had never held her breath when shooting. That made hands shake. Breath had to flow steady and constant, the body a conduit for intention. 180 yards separated her from the young man. She could see the individual threads in his collar, could count the buttons on his shirt, could measure the space between his eyes where the bullet would travel. She thought of nothing, not prayer, not consequence, not the 47 lives she had already taken in service to her country. She thought only of stopping the threat, of protecting the sacred ground beneath her feet, of keeping Mary Grace from hearing gunfire in her final hours. Less than 2 seconds had passed since the young man's hand touched his gun. In that time, empires rose and fell. In that time, souls made their eternal accounting. In that time, Sister Abigail Thorne became once more the thing she had spent 8 years trying to bury. The Winchester cracked. The sound tore the morning open. Birds exploded from the cottonwood trees behind the dormitory wings, was beating panic against the sky. The echo slammed against the valley walls and returned distorted, multiplied a chorus of violence. Smoke leaped from the barrel, sharp and bitter, stinging her nose with the old familiar smell of burnt powder and cordite, and choices that could not be unmade. The younger man's head snapped back. For one impossible heartbeat, he remained upright, mouth open as if to speak, eyes wide with surprise that had not yet processed into understanding. Then his body remembered it was dead and toppled backward. He struck the ground without sound, limbs arranging themselves in the random geometry of sudden death. A small, dark hole marked the center of his forehead, precisely between his eyes. He had never cleared leather, had never finished the draw that started everything, had never known what killed him. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the stunned silence of a world reorganizing itself around new and terrible knowledge. Sister Abigail did not lower the gun, did not advance. She simply stood exactly where she was, smoke drifting past her face, the Winchester steady in her hands. Her heart hammered now, but not wildly. It beat heavy and slow, carrying weight meant for someone younger, someone who had not done this 47 times before, 48. The number appeared automatically in her mind, as if some accountant lived in her skull, tallying death with the same dispassion as a merchant counting inventory. 47 in service of the United States Army. Now 48. Forgive me, Mary Grace. The words formed silently a prayer to the dying woman inside who could not hear, but whose judgment mattered more than God's. The older brother stared. His mouth worked once, twice, producing no sound. His confident smile had evaporated like morning dew. The big man swore loud and ugly and instinctive. Jesus Christ, Brennan. The older brother's shout cracked across the yard. Get down! The tracker, Brennan Cody, dropped from his saddle without thinking. His body reacting faster than conscious thought could manage, diving behind the water trough. The boy's horse jumped beneath him, nearly unseating him, as panic surged through animal and rider alike. Sister Abigail's gaze tracked across them, all cataloging threats, measuring distances, calculating angles of fire. The military mind worked independently of faith, a parallel system that prayer had never quite managed to override. The older brother found his voice, though it came out strangled and higher than before. I warned you. Sister Abigail's voice carried clearly across the courtyard, steady as the weapon in her hands. Not loud, not shaking, simply final, like a door closing on a room no one would enter again. The words settled into the space like dirt thrown onto a coffin. The big man recovered first, as men like him always did. Men who survived by reacting faster than fear, whose violence was professional rather than personal. He swung his rifle up, hands trembling only slightly, and aimed at the figure standing on the chapel steps. Kill her! His shout was more to convince himself than command others. Kill her now. The older brother flinched at the word, then rage poured in to fill the hollow where certainty had been. His face contorted red, flooding up from his collar. Kill her! His voice cracked like a whip, trying to impose order on chaos through volume alone. Behind the water trough, Brennan pressed his back harder against the metal, breath coming fast. His eyes darted between the dead man in the dirt and the nun who had not moved an inch since firing. Calculation showed in his features. Assessment. The slow, terrible understanding of someone who had just recognized a predator wearing praise clothing. The boy's eyes went wild, darting from body to brothers to the woman who had killed without hesitation or visible remorse. His mouth opened and closed, words failing him. Sister Abigail felt a shift. The moment when warning crossed into war. The taste of metal appeared at the back of her tongue, not blood, but memory, the same taste that she had sworn never to experience again. Her hands remained steady on the Winchester, but something in her chest ached, with a pain that had nothing to do with her body and everything to do with the wreckage of 8 years spent trying to become someone else. She had not wanted this, had tried to avoid it. God help her, she had tried to let them walk away. But the young man had reached for his gun, and her body had moved with the terrible efficiency of 4 decades training and now there was blood in the courtyard of the only sanctuary she had ever known. The big man leveled his weapon, anger burning bright enough to override sense. Sister Abigail watched the barrel center on her chest, watched his finger tighten on the trigger, watched the mathematics of violence accelerate toward their inevitable conclusion. His shot went wide, driven in more by rage than aim. The bullet struck the chapel post with the sound of a hammer splitting bone. Wood burst outward. Splinters flew past Sister Abigail's face, and one drew blood along her cheek, a thin line of red against pale skin. She did not flinch, did not step back. Her eyes tracked the big man's movements with mechanical precision. He was shouting something incoherent and furious, working the action on his rifle to chamber another round. Sister Abigail adjusted her aim minutely. The Winchester cracked again, the report echoing the first but deeper somehow, as if the valley itself had learned to anticipate the sound. The bullet took the big man low in the chest just beneath his heart. The impact knocked him backward like an invisible hand had shoved him. His rifle fell from his grasp with a dull clatter against stone. He went down on one knee, eyes wide with surprise, then toppled onto his side. He did not die immediately. His hands clawed at his chest where blood spread fast and dark soaking through his shirt in pulses that matched his failing heartbeat. He tried to speak, but only wet sounds emerged. His boots dug furrows in the dirt as he attempted to crawl, animal instinct driving him toward cover even as his body bled out beneath him. Sister Abigail watched without expression. The second shot had come easier than the first. That frightened her more than anything else. The return to old patterns, the muscle memory of killing, the way her body knew exactly what to do when prayer failed. The big man's hands stretched toward his fallen rifle. Blood pooled beneath him, darkening the earth. His fingers brushed the stock, trying to gain purchase. A choice crystallized in the space between heartbeats. If he reached that rifle, he would fire blindly at the chapel, at the walls that sheltered Mary Grace in her final hours. He would desecrate the only home Sister Abigail had known since leaving the army. He would force her hand again and again until the courtyard ran red. Or she could end it, quickly, mercifully if mercy could exist in such moments. The memory of Sister Mary Grace rose unbidden. Not dying as she was now, but years before, standing in the doorway of this very chapel, watching young Sister Abigail clean the Winchester after a long ride checking the fence lines. Mary Grace's face had been tight with quiet worry. You don't have to keep being that person. Sister Abigail had believed her, had tried to believe her. The big man groaned and pulled himself forward another inch, leaving a dark smear behind him. His fingers closed around the rifle stock. Sister Abigail raised the Winchester, one breath, one prayer that went unanswered, one squeeze of the trigger. The third shot echoed lower than the others, deeper somehow, as if the earth itself participated in the sound. It struck clean and final. The big man went still, his hand falling away from the weapon he would never fire again. 49. The count came automatically inevitable as breathing. 49 souls weighed against her own. 49 lives ended by her hand. 49 names she would never know but could never forget. The yard fell into terrible quiet. No screaming, no movement, only the wind dragging dust across blood-darkened dirt, and somewhere far off that crow calling, again indifferent to human violence. Sister Abigail kept the old gun raised for several seconds after the big man stopped breathing. Her arms trembled now, not with fear, but with the aftershock that followed necessity. The weight of what she had done settled across her shoulders like a yoke she had once laid down but could never fully escape. She lowered the barrel slowly, her stomach twisted with nausea that had nothing to do with the sight of blood. She had seen worse, had caused worse. The sickness came from recognition, from the terrible familiarity of it all. Her hands knew exactly how to kill. Her eyes automatically calculated distance and wind. Her body moved through the sequence of violence as if the 8 years of peace had been nothing but a brief intermission in a longer, darker performance. This was the cost. This was always the cost. Behind the water trough, Brennan made a sound that might have been a sob. He pressed his hands to his face, then looked up again. Eyes wild, searching for somewhere to hide, some way to undo what had already been written in blood. The boy stared at the two bodies, mouth open, tears tracking lines through the dust on his cheeks. He could not look away. Horror and disbelief warred on his young face, and neither one leaving him frozen between action and collapse. The older brother knelt beside the big man's corpse, hands hovering uselessly above the body, as if he might pull his companion back through sheer force of will. He made a sound that belonged to no language, raw and animal, and beyond the reach of words. You didn't have to. He looked up at Sister Abigail, and his voice carried all the rage and incomprehension of someone whose certainties had shattered. You didn't have to do that. Sister Abigail's response came quiet but clear. He did not stop. The older brother's face twisted. Something broke loose behind his eyes, transforming grief into fury, confusion into clarity of purpose. This was no longer about supplies or silver. It was no longer about survival through winter. It was about humiliation and loss, and the unbearable truth that he had been wrong, had miscalculated, had led his men into death at the hands of an old woman in a gray habit. You hear that? He shouted to the others, to the world, to the empty sky above. She thinks she's judging God both. He rose slowly, legs unsteady, hands shaking with the effort of restraint. His jaw clenched until the muscles stood out hard beneath his skin. I don't want your land anymore. His voice broke into something raw and unhinged. I want you dead. The words dropped into the yard heavier than any bullet. Brennan flinched. The boy sobbed once, sharp and quiet. Sister Abigail felt the truth settle into her bones. There would be no backing down now, no negotiation, no possibility of both parties walking away. The line had been crossed, and it ran straight through blood-soaked earth and the wreckage of whatever peace she had managed to build in 8 years of gardens and prayer. The older brother lifted his pistol eyes, burning with rage that had consumed reason, and left only the desire to inflict pain equal to what he felt. The wind surged again, rattling the fence, stirring dust and smoke, and the bitter scent of spent powder. Sister Abigail tightened her grip on the Winchester, not because she wanted to fire again, but because she knew she might have to. And as the older brother took his first step forward, madness driving him where reason had failed, Sister Abigail, Thorne stood on the chapel steps alone, steady despite the tremor in her soul, braced for whatever came next. But before the next shot could be fired, the boy broke. It was not courage that failed Jesse Hart in that moment. It was something simpler, older, the part of a man that knows deep in the marrow when death has stepped too close to be argued with. The instant the big man went still in the dirt, something inside the boy snapped loose like a rope stretched past breaking. He made a sound, small and involuntary, barely human. His horse felt the panic flood through him and jerked sideways, hooves skidding in the dust. Jesse fumbled the reins, nearly lost his seat, then clutched them hard as terror overwhelmed every other impulse. I didn't sign up for this. The words came out as a whisper, though no one was listening. The older brother was shouting again, voice raw with grief and rage. Brennan remained frozen behind the water trough, and the nun stood on the chapel steps like she had been carved there, powder smoke still drifting from the Winchester's barrel. Jesse looked at her, really looked, past the gray habit and the lined face and the white hair pulled back beneath the veil. He saw something else, something cold and practiced and utterly certain. She was not chasing them, not smiling, not triumphant. That frightened him more than the shooting itself. His breath hitched, his chest burned, his hands shook so badly he had to clamp his knees against the saddle to stay upright. Then he turned his horse, not with thought, not with plan. Pure instinct seized control and spun the animal toward the barn, toward the open land beyond, toward anywhere that was not this courtyard filling with blood and smoke and the terrible certainty of his own death. He dug his heels in hard. The horse leaped forward, hooves tearing at the dirt. Jesse bent low over its neck, making himself small, expecting the bullet that would punch between his shoulder blades at any second. Jesse, the older brother's roar cracked like a whip across the yard. Get back here! The command might as well have been shouted at the wind. Jesse did not slow, could not. Fear drove faster than any loyalty, any pride, any sense of what men were supposed to do when their companions fell. Coward. The word followed him, heavy with rage and disbelief. You hear me? Get your worthless hide back here. But words could not catch a man running for his life. Dust exploded behind the fleeing horse. The barn loomed closer, weathered boards in a dark mouth of an opening that promised cover-escape survival. Jesse's vision tunneled. He did not draw his weapon, did not even touch it. His hand stayed white-knuckled on the reins, desperate for purchase, on something, anything that might keep him alive. On the chapel steps, Sister Abigail saw everything. She watched the way he rode crooked and unbalanced, shoulders hunched, as if expecting impact. She saw the raw terror on his face when he glanced sideways, measuring the distance to safety. The shot was perfect, 140 yards. Moving target, but not difficult. The angle was clean. Nothing in the way but air and the terrible arithmetic of violence. Her finger rested near the trigger. The Winchester knew what came next. Her body knew. 48 years of training knew. But something else rose to meet that knowledge. Unbidden. Unwelcome. A memory from another war, another boy running across open ground. The memory arrived sharp and complete. Apache Campaign 1863. A young warrior, maybe 17, fleeing across broken ground with a rifle too big for his hands. He had been wearing the wrong colors, fighting for the wrong side, but those distinctions meant nothing to the bullets. An officer had shouted the order, "Fire!" And young Abigail Thorne, not yet sister, not yet burdened by conscience, had done what orders required. The shot had been clean. The boy had fallen. And only later, much later, did she learn he had been the son of a chief recently married his wife carrying their first child. None of that information changed anything. The dead stayed dead, but it added weight to the carrying. The present crashed back. Jesse was almost to the barn. 10 more seconds, and he would be gone, lost in the timber beyond, no longer a threat to anything except his own conscience. Sister Abigail lifted the Winchester fully. The sight found his back without effort. Her hands knew the geometry. Her body understood the physics. Muscle memory stretched back across decades of confirmed kills, each one teaching the lesson again. When you have the shot, you take it. But he was not turning, not aiming, not threatening, just running. Her jaw tightened. Her arms trembled, not from fear but from restraint. The effort of not pulling the trigger required more strength than firing ever had. She could hear her own pulse now loud in her ears, the thud, thud, thud of a heart that had beaten through too many of these moments, each one leaving its mark like a scar that never quite healed. This was the line, not between life and death, but between necessity and choice, between what she could do and what she should do, between the soldier she had been and the woman she was trying to become. Sister Abigail exhaled slowly and lowered the barrel. The old gun dipped deliberate and final until the sight no longer framed the boys fleeing back. Jesse reached the barn and vanished inside, hooves thundering on old planks, the sound echoing hollow and frantic. The yard seemed to sag in the silence he left behind, as if his absence created a vacuum that even the wind could not fill. The older brother stared after him, face contorted with fury that had nowhere productive to go. "You spineless little bastard." The words tore out of him, shredding what was left of his composure. "You don't run. You hear me? You don't run from family." No answer came, only the restless stamping of the remaining horses and the moan of wind through broken boards. Brennan turned his head slowly towards Sister Abigail. He had seen it, seen the rifle rise, seen it fall. His mouth parted slightly, and when he spoke, disbelief threaded through every word. "You could have killed him." Sister Abigail did not answer immediately. She stood with the Winchester lowered shoulders, carrying weight that had nothing to do with the weapon's physical mass. Each breath felt like effort, as if the air itself had thickened with the residue of violence. He was not a threat. Her words came quiet but clear. The older brother let out a harsh, barking laugh, devoid of humor. "You think that makes you merciful?" She met his eyes directly, and something in her gaze made him flinch despite his rage. "No, it makes me honest." The words landed harder than any curse. The older brother's face twisted as confusion crept beneath the fury. He had expected cruelty, expected fear, expected the righteous vengeance of someone pushed past breaking. He had not expected restraint, could not fit it into any framework that made sense. Brennan swallowed hard. His grip on his own rifle tightened, then loosened again, as if his hands could not decide whether they held a weapon or an anchor. He glanced toward the barn where Jesse had disappeared, then back at Sister Abigail. "She's choosing." He said it quietly, almost to himself, working through the implications. "Choosing what?" The older brother snapped the question like breaking a stick. Brennan did not answer. He was watching Sister Abigail's face, now studying it with the attention of someone who read sign for a living. Not the gun, not the bodies. Her face, the exhaustion that lined it. The grief that sat beneath her eyes like a second shadow. She looked like someone carrying impossible weight, not enjoying it. That recognition frightened him more than the shooting had. Men who killed for pleasure were predictable. You could understand their patterns, anticipate their moves. But someone who killed only when forced, who chose not to when they could, that was something else entirely. That suggested principles. And principles made people dangerous in ways that simple violence never could. The older brother and Brennan crouched behind the water trough, now weapons held, but not aimed, faces tight, with the effort of thinking past fury towards something resembling strategy. The metal trough was dented and rust-stained, marked with the splatter of blood from earlier. Neither man spoke, but their eyes moved constantly, measuring angles, calculating odds, trying to find purchase in a situation that had spiraled far beyond their control. Sister Abigail remained on the chapel steps. The Winchester rested in her hands at a neutral angle, barrel pointed toward the ground, but ready to rise in the space of a heartbeat. Smoke had stopped curling from the muzzle, but the smell lingered, acrid and unmistakable. The distance between them felt vast, despite being less than 40 yards. It was the distance between the living and those who had chosen to threaten them. The distance between mercy offered and mercy accepted. The distance between what had happened and what might still come. The older brother swallowed hard. His mouth tasted like copper and dust and the bitter residue of decisions made too quickly. His ears still rang from the gunshots, not just from the noise, but from the weight of what they meant. 2 men dead, 1 fled, and a woman on a porch who had not moved since the first bullet had left her barrel. That stillness gnawed at him. She did not pace, did not shout demands, did not rush to press her advantage. That steady, patient presence suggested either supreme confidence or something deeper, something he did not want to name. Jesus. The word escaped him, half prayer, half curse. Brennan shot him a warning glance. Don't, the older brother ignored him. He leaned forward just enough to peer around the edge of the trough, taking in the figure still standing in the same spot, patient as stone. Listen, he called across the courtyard, forcing his voice into something steadier than he felt. This doesn't need to go any further. His words echoed weakly, swallowed by the vastness of the valley and the weight of what had already occurred. Sister Abigail did not answer, only the faint creak of wood as she shifted her weight slightly, a sound that carried clearly in the unnatural quiet. The older brother's heart hammered against his ribs despite the cold. He could feel sweat trickling down his spine, soaking into his shirt. We came in wrong, I'll own that. Things got out of hand. Out of hand. The phrase tasted bitter even to him, a grotesque understatement for 2 corpses and a boy fleeing in terror. But what else could he say? That he had misjudged, that he had led his men to slaughter, that he had mistaken a guardian for prey. Brennan stared at the dirt, jaw tight, seeing the big man's face in his mind's eye, remembering how fast a living person could become a body, how little separated breath from stillness. We'll leave, the older brother continued, words coming faster now, desperation leaking through despite his efforts to contain it. Right now, no cattle, no trouble. We'll ride out the same way we came. He paused, listening to the quality of the silence. It was not dismissive. It was considering. And that frightened him more than an immediate refusal would have. We won't come back. His voice gained strength from the promise, as if speaking it could make it true. I swear it. The wind brushed past, stirring the fence, making the loose boards creak. Somewhere a hinge squealed softly, then fell silent again. The horses shifted, restless with the smell of blood and the tension radiating from their riders. Still, Sister Abigail said nothing. Brennan risked another look toward her. He could see the strain in her arms now, the way the weapon's weight dragged at her shoulders despite her steady grip. She looked tired, not wounded, not shaken, just worn, like someone who had been awake too long guarding something precious. She's listening. He whispered the observation to his companion. The older brother shot him a glare. I know that. But knowing and understanding were different things. The silence stretched, pulling tight like rope under strain, and with each passing second, the older brother felt his courage thinning. The part of him that thrived on bluster and intimidation had nowhere to stand anymore. There was no crowd to play to, no advantage to press, just open ground and a woman who had already proven she could end him before he finished forming the intention to fight. I mean it. He tried again, softer this time, and the softness felt like surrender even as he spoke. We walk, you never hear our names again. Sister Abigail's voice, when it finally came, carried across the courtyard with perfect clarity. Turn around. The older brother blinked. What? "Get on your horses." Her words were neither loud nor emphatic, just certain. "And leave." Hope flared brief and dangerous. He glanced at Brennan, who nodded once, quick and fearful. Slowly, carefully, the older brother lifted his revolver away from where it had been resting against the trough and laid it on the dirt. The metal made a soft, final sound when it landed like a coin dropped into still water. Brennan followed suit, easing his rifle down with shaking hands that he could not quite control. They rose together, stiff and careful, as if sudden movement might break an invisible compact. Each motion felt like walking along the edge of a cliff in darkness, one wrong step from falling into something that could not be survived. Sister Abigail watched every inch of it. She did not lift the Winchester higher, did not lower it further, simply waited with the patience of someone who had learned that stillness was its own form of power. The older brother took one step back from the trough, then another. Each movement required conscious effort, fighting against instinct that screamed this was madness, that no sane person turned their back on an armed enemy. Their horses stood 30 yards away. The distance had never seemed so great. Every foot of open ground felt exposed, vulnerable, like crossing a frozen lake while hearing the ice crack beneath. The older brother stopped and turned his head slightly, just enough to speak without fully facing her. "You let us go." Why, Sister Abigail's answer came after a pause that seemed to stretch forever. "Because you are walking away." He waited, confused, expecting more. When nothing else came, he prompted, "That's it. That is the rule." Her voice held no emotion, no threat, no promise, just fact delivered with the weight of something that had been tested and proven and would not bend. The older brother frowned, trying to parse meaning from simplicity. "What rule? I do not shoot men in the back." The words hung in the air between them, simultaneously merciful and terrifying. She was not bargaining, not bluffing. This was not kindness or weakness. This was law, her law drawn in blood and held with the same unwavering certainty that had guided her aim. Something passed through the older brother's face then, relief tangled with shame, understanding mixed with humiliation. He grasped fully what she was offering and what it cost to accept. She was giving them their lives, but the price was turning their backs, exposing themselves utterly, trusting that she meant what she said while knowing she had every reason and ability to break that trust. Brennan let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. His shoulders sagged slightly, as if some invisible weight had lifted though plenty remained. They turned their backs on her. Every instinct in the older brother screamed that this was suicide, that no rational person would expose themselves like this, that the bullet would come any second now, and he would never hear the shot that killed him. He felt naked without his gun, stripped of the basic tools of survival. Every step toward the horses echoed too loud in his ears, each footfall a drumbeat counting down to impact. It did not come. The space between the water trough and the horses stretched long and brutal. Dust clung to their boots. The sun climbed higher, warming the back of the older brother's neck, as if nothing in the world were wrong, as if this were just another morning in the territory, unremarkable and forgettable. Behind them, Sister Abigail stood unmoving. She watched their retreat with stillness that cost her more than pulling the trigger ever had. Her arms burned with fatigue. Her fingers ached from gripping the old gun. Her heart pounded so hard it made her dizzy, sent spots dancing at the edges of her vision. But she did not raise the Winchester, did not fire, did not break the word she had given, though part of her wondered if she was making a terrible mistake, if these men would return with reinforcements, if mercy now would mean blood later. The older brother reached his horse. So did Brennan. They grabbed the reins with hands that shook visibly now that the moment of greatest danger had passed. For one terrible moment, the older brother paused, fingers frozen on the leather, every muscle in his body screaming conflicting commands. "Don't!" Brennan hissed the word through clenched teeth. The older brother mounted. As he swung into the saddle, he felt the full weight of Sister Abigail's gaze on his back. It was not hateful, not gloating, just watchful, measuring, ready to respond if he gave her reason. He settled into the saddle, breath coming ragged and uneven. Neither man dared look back. They nudged their horses forward, slow at first, then faster, as distance accumulated, and the terrible certainty of death receded slightly. The gate loomed ahead, that simple wooden frame that marked the boundary between sanctuary and the world beyond. Passing through it felt like crossing from one existence into another. Only when the horses hit the road, When solid ground gave way to the packed dirt of the trail, did the older brother finally breathe again. The air came in shuddering gasps, his body catching up to what his mind had endured. Behind them, St. Catherine's Convent stood quiet in the morning light. Sister Abigail remained on the porch, rifle lowered, now eyes still fixed on the space they had crossed, knowing that keeping her word had just revealed something dangerous. Not to them, but to anyone else who might hear the story and decide to test whether her mercy was principle or weakness. The two men rode in silence for nearly a mile before either spoke. What was she? Brennan's voice came out rough, scraped raw by fear and incomprehension. The older brother did not answer immediately. He was still seeing the moment the rifle had risen, the cold precision of those shots, the way she had moved, like someone for whom violence was not impulse, but craft refined over years into something approaching art. "I don't know," he finally said, "but I know what she was." Brennan waited, a soldier. The words came slowly, each one pulled from the wreckage of certainty. Not militia, not some rancher's wife who learned to shoot. Professional, military. His mind returned against his will to the small, dark hole in his brother's forehead, the perfect placement of a shot taken under pressure at distance. That kind of accuracy did not come from luck or desperation. It came from repetition, from training measured in years, and ammunition measured in thousands of rounds, and targets that bled when you hit them. Brennan nodded slowly. His own experience reading sign and surviving in contested territory had taught him to recognize the marks of formal training. When she spoke to us, before we left, "Did you hear what she said?" The older brother shook his head. 47 confirmed kills, military, Mexico border campaigns, Apache wars. Brennan's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 47 people she'd killed before today. The older brother felt something cold settle deep in his gut, spreading outward like frost. 47. Not a woman who had killed once in self-defense. Not someone pushed past, breaking by circumstance. A warrior. Someone who had made death their profession long before she ever put on that gray habit. "You let us walk," Brennan said it quietly, still working through the implications. "After everything, she could have killed us." Yes. Then why? The older brother had been asking himself the same question since the moment she lowered her rifle. The answer, when it came, felt both simple and impossibly complex, because we turned our backs. He paused, trying to articulate something he barely understood himself. "That's her line. You run, you live. You fight, you die. It's not mercy. It's just her code." They rode on through the cold morning, leaving the convent behind, but carrying its weight with them. And in that weight lived the certain knowledge that they had survived not through skill or luck, but because a woman who knew 47 ways to kill had chosen 49 times to show restraint. The older brother's name was Caleb Stone. That knowledge would matter later when choices made in blood led him down paths he could never have imagined. But in that moment, he was simply a man riding away from death, trying to understand what mercy looked like, when delivered by someone who clearly understood the cost of withholding it. Behind them, invisible but ever present, Sister Abigail Thorne knelt in the convent garden and was quietly, privately sick in the turned earth, her body rejecting what her training had made routine, the smell of gunpowder still clinging to her habit like accusation. The earth resisted her shovel with the stubbornness of ground that had frozen and thawed too many times. Sister Abigail drove the blade down again, feeling the jarring impact travel up her arms into her shoulders, the ache settling deep into bones that remembered younger days when such work came easier. The sun climbed higher as she dug, burning away the morning cold, but offering no warmth that reached her core. 2 graves. She would dig 2 graves at the valley's edge, far from the consecrated ground where the faithful rested. These men had threatened sacred space. They had forced her hand, but they would not lie in holy earth. That boundary at least she could maintain. Her hands blistered as she worked the skin, splitting where calluses built through 8 years of garden work proved insufficient for this harsher labor. Blood mixed with dirt on her palms, and she welcomed the pain because it was clean, physical, something that could be understood and endured without the complexity of moral reckoning. By the time the holes were deep enough, the sun had passed its zenith. Sister Abigail stood in an earth that came to her waist, breathing hard, feeling every one of her 54 years pressing against her chest. She climbed out slowly, muscles screaming protest, and walked back to retrieve the first body. Dragging the dead was different from burying them. The weight was wrong, distributed in ways that made mockery of human dignity. The younger brother was lighter than she expected. His boots left shallow grooves in the dirt, parallel lines that would fade by morning, but which in that moment seemed like indictments written in the earth itself. She did not look at his face as she rolled him into the grave, did not let herself think about who he might have been before violence made him into this, a body to be disposed of, a problem to be solved. When the first shovelful of dirt struck his chest with a hollow thump, she closed her eyes briefly, then continued working. The big man proved harder. Twice she had to stop to catch her breath, hands on knees tasting copper at the back of her throat. By the time she maneuvered his bulk to the grave's edge, her vision swam with exhaustion and something deeper, a fatigue that had nothing to do with physical exertion. The second grave filled faster. The earth seemed eager to reclaim what had been taken from it. When both mounds rose smooth and final against the valley floor, Sister Abigail stood between them, the shovel hanging loose in her grip, and felt the full weight of what she had done settle across her shoulders like a yoke designed specifically for her frame. She had brought wildflower seeds in her pocket, not planned, just habit. She scattered them across both graves, now the small dark specks disappearing into the disturbed soil. By spring, if the snow did not come too hard, yellow and white blooms would mark these spots. Life from death, growth from violence. It was the least she could offer, and far more than they deserved, in exactly the kind of contradiction that defined every day of her existence since she had traded a uniform for a habit. Sister Mary Grace's voice memory, more than ghost, rose unbidden in her mind. You do not have to forget Abigail. You must transform. Your hands took life. Here they will give it. Gardens, bread, medicine. Sister Abigail looked down at her hands, earth and blood worked into every crease and line. These hands had killed 49 people now. These same hands had planted rosemary that morning before the world tilted toward violence. The same hands, the same woman. How was transformation possible when the capacity for both remained woven together so tightly that separating them seemed impossible? In Mary Grace's memorial garden behind the chapel, 47 roses already bloomed when season permitted, one for each soul taken during her military years. Planted over 8 years of penance and prayer. Tonight she would plant 2 more. 49 roses, 49 souls, the accounting complete. She walked back to the chapel as the sun began its descent, each step requiring conscious decision, her body wanting only to collapse where it stood. Inside, Mary Grace lay in her narrow bed, breath coming shallow and irregular. The old woman's eyes were closed, but they fluttered open when Sister Abigail entered, and the look she gave was both knowing and infinitely sad. You had to, didn't you? Mary Grace's voice barely rose above a whisper. Sister Abigail knelt beside the bed, taking the frail hand in her own earth-stained fingers. Yes. How many? 2 people. 49 total. Mary Grace's grip tightened with surprising strength. Did you show mercy? Sister Abigail felt tears prickling at her eyes, hot and unwelcome. I let one run. A boy frightened. I couldn't bring myself to shoot him in the back. A faint smile touched Mary Grace's lips. Then you kept your promise. What promise? Sister Abigail's voice broke. I killed people. I broke the commandment. I became the thing I've spent 8 years trying to bury. No. Mary Grace's eyes held hers with an intensity that defied her dying body. You chose the harder path. You saved the one who could be saved. Memory surfaced sharp and painful. 7 years earlier, this same room, Mary Grace in better health, but already sensing the weight her protege carried. Promise me something, Mary Grace had said. Anything. If violence comes again, choose the harder path. I don't understand. Mary Grace had taken her hand then, just as Sister Abigail held hers now. Killing is easy for you. It is your nature, your training. The harder path is mercy. Promise me you will try. Sister Abigail had wept in great racking sobs that came from a place she thought she had sealed off. I promise you are not the angel of death anymore. Mary Grace had pulled her close, holding her while she broke apart. You are my gardener. Grow life, Abigail, not graves. The present reasserted itself. Mary Grace's breathing had grown more labored, each inhalation a battle won at terrible cost. Sister Abigail watched the woman who had saved her from herself slipping away, and the grief threatened to crush her entirely. I planted 47 roses, one for each soul, in your memorial garden. Mary Grace's eyes glistened. And you will plant 2 more. Then you will forgive yourself. I can't. Sister Abigail leaned her head against the edge of the bed, exhaustion and sorrow warring within her. 49 lives, 49 souls I sent to God's judgment. How do I carry that? The old woman's hand found her hair, stroking it with the tenderness of a mother for a broken child. How many have you saved since the boy today? The men you let walk away. The families protected by this convent existing. You are more than your count, child. Her breathing grew shallower still. Sister Abigail felt panic rising. Not yet. Please, not yet. I need you. But death keeps its own schedule and respects no plea. Mary Grace's eyes found hers one last time. You are not just a number. Her words came separated by long pauses, each one costing her what little remained. You are more. Much more. The hand in Sister Abigail's grasp went slack. The breathing stopped. And in the sudden silence, Sister Abigail Thorne found herself alone with her 49 dead and no compass to navigate the darkness ahead. She wept then as she had not wept since entering the convent. Not for the men she had killed, not for herself, but for the one person who had looked at her blood-stained soul and seen something worth saving. Without Mary Grace, the violence felt purposeless, the restraint arbitrary. Without her witness and guidance, Sister Abigail did not know who she was supposed to become. Sister Ruth found her there an hour later, still kneeling, still holding the dead woman's hand, tears long since dried but leaving salt tracks on her weathered cheeks. The funeral was small, just the sisters of St. Catherine's and a handful of townspeople who had known Mary Grace's kindness. Sister Abigail stood apart during the service, unable to join the prayers, feeling herself separate from the community that had sheltered her. She was a weapon in their midst, a blade hidden among pruning shears. And now, with Mary Grace gone, the illusion that she could be anything else felt impossibly fragile. Father Gabriel Cross arrived 3 days after the funeral, riding a fine horse and carrying a document that marked him as something more than a simple traveling priest. He was perhaps 46 years old, well-dressed for the frontier, his coat free of trail dust despite the long ride. His eyes were sharp and assessing, taking in the bullet scars on the chapel wall, the fresh graves visible on the hillside, the Winchester now mounted above the altar where Sister Abigail had placed it, unable to bear having it near, but unwilling to discard it entirely. They sat in the chapel while wind rattled the windows. Father Gabriel's hands remained still on the table before him, but his gaze never stopped moving, cataloging, evaluating. Sister Abigail Thorne. His voice carried the smooth cadence of education and authority. I am Father Gabriel Cross. I work with the federal government on matters of territorial expansion and peacekeeping. Sister Abigail said nothing, waiting. The West is changing. Rail lines, land rushes, conflicts between settlers and native peoples. Local marshals cannot manage it all. We need people who understand violence but do not seek it. People who can prevent bloodshed rather than simply responding to it. You want to recruit me? It was not a question, and Father Gabriel had the grace not to treat it as one. Yes. He produced a folder from his satchel, opening it to reveal military records that should have remained sealed. Sister Abigail saw her younger face staring up from an old photograph, eyes hard in a way that shocked her even now. Service records, commendations, kill counts meticulously logged. The paper trail of a life she thought she had left behind. 47 confirmed kills. Father Gabriel's finger traced the notation. 1846 to 1865. Highest accuracy rating in the Army's history. You were not just good, sister. You were legendary. That woman is dead. Sister Abigail's voice came flat and hard. Is she? 2 weeks ago, you killed 2 men at distance? Perfect placement. No hesitation. That is not a dead woman. That is dormant skill. The words struck like a physical blow. Sister Abigail stood abruptly, chair scraping against stone. You have no right to those records. I have every right. Father Gabriel's tone remained calm, implacable. You are a federal asset, sister, whether you accept it or not. The question is whether you will use your gifts in service of order or let them rust while good people die because they lack your expertise. Sister Abigail turned to face the altar, the Winchester visible in her peripheral vision. I took vows of peace, and you have kept them better than most. Father Gabriel rose, moving to stand beside her. You did not seek that fight. You ended it as quickly as possible. You showed mercy to those who retreated. That is exactly the temperament we need. The offer was substantial. Federal position with autonomy, salary enough to support the convent and fund expansion, protection for St. Catherine's, training opportunities for deputies and marshals in de-escalation and precision response, all of it wrapped in the language of service and duty. But underneath the reasonable words, Sister Abigail heard the implicit threat. Caleb Stone remained at large, a federal fugitive. Questions would be asked about why she let him go. Her judgment could be called into question. Her loyalties examined. Unless, of course, she was working officially for the government, then her decisions would be trusted, supported back by the full authority of federal law. And if I refuse, Father Gabriel's expression did not change. Then you remain here, free to continue your work. But the questions will not go away. And the next time violence finds you, you will face it alone. He paused at the chapel door before leaving. I knew Mary Grace, you know. Sister Abigail turned sharply. What? She wrote to me before she died, asked me to watch over you, said you would face this choice someday, and that you would need someone who understood the burden you carry. The revelation hit like cold water. What did she tell you? That you would choose the harder path, always? His smile was fond and knowing. I am here to make sure you have that option. He left the documents on the altar next to the Bible, an offering, or a test. Sister Abigail could not decide which. She sat alone in the empty chapel for a long time, watching shadows lengthen across the stone floor, thinking about paths and choices, and the difference between what was easy and what was right. Jesse Hart returned on a cold afternoon in late November, his horse picking its way carefully up the valley road. Sister Abigail was in the garden wrapping burlap around the rose bushes to protect them from the coming winter. 47 roses, soon to be 49. She saw him coming and did not stop working, letting him approach at his own pace. He dismounted slowly as if the ground might give way beneath him. His face was thinner than she remembered, marked by sleepless nights and conscience that would not rest. Sister Abigail, his voice cracked on her name. I don't know if I should be here. She straightened, studying him. Then why are you? 'Cause I ran. Shame colored every word. I am a coward. I left them to die and I ran like a frightened child. Sister Abigail set down her shears and walked to where he stood, seeing in his haunted eyes a reflection she recognized from mirrors in quiet moments alone. You survived. That is not cowardice. That is wisdom. The others say I abandoned them. The others are dead, boy. You are not. That means you chose correctly. Jesse's face crumpled. But I can't sleep. I see Elias falling every time I close my eyes. I can't hold a gun without shaking. The men in town call me the boy the nuns scared off. I don't know how to live with this. Sister Abigail took his arm gently and led him to the graves at the valley's edge. The wildflower seeds had not yet sprouted, but the mounds were still visible, darker earth against the valley floor. Do you see these? Yes, ma'am. I dug them, alone. Every shovelful I asked God to forgive me, not for killing them. They forced that choice, for how easy it was. Jesse looked confused. Easy? I was trained to kill for 19 years. Drilling, shooting, obeying orders. When the moment came in that courtyard, my body moved before my soul could object. That is not strength, Jesse. That is reflex. And reflex is dangerous because it requires no thought, no choice, no moral weight. Then why did you let me go? Because you ran. Running meant you were not a threat, and I made a promise to someone I loved that I would choose mercy when I could. You gave me that chance. Jesse was quiet for a long moment. Teach me. Teach you what? How to be brave without being violent. How to stand my ground without killing. Sister Abigail studied his face, seeing genuine hunger for understanding there. That is what I am trying to learn myself. Then we will learn together. Over the following weeks, Sister Abigail taught Jesse what she could. Not shooting, she would not train another killer. But tracking, reading the land, understanding how to move through dangerous territory without becoming danger yourself. Most importantly, she taught him the art of knowing when to fight and when to walk away. They repaired the chapel wall together, filling the bullet holes with plaster mixed from valley clay. As they worked, she told him about the Guardian's Creed, the philosophy she was slowly forming from the wreckage of her military past and the seeds Mary Grace had planted. A Guardian has 3 rules. Sister Abigail pressed plaster into a hole, smoothing it with careful strokes. 1. Protect the innocent. Always. No exceptions. That is the oath you take. Jesse nodded, focused on his own section of wall. 2. Exhaust every option before violence. Words presence, reputation law. The gun is the last resort, not the first. What is 3? If you must kill, do it clean. No cruelty, no excess. One shot, and then you carry it. Forever. You do not forget. You do not justify it by. You accept the weight and you let it shape you into someone who never wants to do it again. And if the weight is too much, then you put down the gun. You find another way to protect. You pass the duty to someone with more strength. Jesse was quiet for a while, working the plaster. When he spoke again, his voice was small. I want to be like you, not the killer, the guardian. Sister Abigail set down her trowel and placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture carrying the weight of benediction. Then make me a promise that you will value mercy over glory, that you will walk away when you can, that you will only fight when someone else cannot. I promise, then you are on the path. It is hard, it is lonely, but it is right. Caleb Stone did not return until deep winter, when snow lay thick across the valley and the roads were treacherous with ice. He came alone, unarmed hands visible, as he approached the gate on foot, having left his horse tied at the valley's edge. Sister Abigail watched him come from the chapel window. Jessie stood beside her, hand instinctively moving toward a rifle that was not there. Should I get the Winchester number? Sister Abigail's eyes never left the approaching figure. He is not here to fight. They met him in the courtyard. Caleb Stone looked thinner than before, weathered by exposure and something deeper. His eyes held shadows that had not been there during the raid, the kind that come from looking inward and not liking what you find. Sister Abigail, he stopped 10 feet away, maintaining distance. I came to understand why you let me live. You walked away. Brennan did not. Caleb's voice caught on the name. He drank himself to death 2 weeks after. Could not live with the shame of running. I am sorry. Do not be. He made his choice as I made mine. I am here because your choice haunts me more than the death of my brother. Sister Abigail waited silent. I have spent 20 years taking what I wanted. You stopped me without hate, just duty. I need to know how you do that. Caleb explained how he had survived the walk out of the valley, nearly dying from exposure, living on charity, evading federal marshals who hunted him. But through it all, he kept returning to her words. Killing is justice. Forgiving is faith. You let me walk away from death. The least I could do was walk towards something better. He met her eyes directly. I turned myself in. Federal marshals have me on work release. I track for them in exchange for reduced sentence. Sister Abigail felt shock ripple through her. You surrendered? You gave me a second chance. I had to do something with it besides waste it on running. They talked through the afternoon, two people who had been on opposite sides of violence, finding unexpected common ground. Caleb spoke of his own count murders committed in rage and fights that blurred the line between self-defense and murder. Unlike Sister Abigail, he could not remember all their faces. That difference opened a chasm between them, but also created understanding. They both carried death. They just carried it differently. Before he left, Caleb offered a warning. Word is spreading. The nun with the rifle. Stories growing with each telling. Some say you are blessed. Others say you are cursed. Either way, people are paying attention. I only want to be left alone. Too late for that. You became a legend when you dropped Elias at 180 yards. Legends do not get to retire. He mounted his horse in the fading light. If you ever need help, sister, tracking, surviving, or just someone who understands what it is like to count bodies in your sleep, you know where to find me. 6 months passed. Spring came to the valley, tentative and beautiful. The wildflowers bloomed on the graves, yellow and white against the green. Sister Abigail tended Mary Grace's memorial garden, planting the final 2 roses she had promised. 49 roses, 49 souls, each one a prayer that violence could become peace. Father Gabriel Cross's offer remained on the altar, untouched but not forgotten. Sister Abigail read it sometimes in the evening quiet, weighing the words against her conscience, trying to understand what Mary Grace would have wanted. The decision came not through revelation, but erosion. Small incidents accumulated like snowfall, each one insignificant but together building toward avalanche. A dispute between miners that nearly became murder, resolved when someone mentioned Sister Abigail might get involved. A range war that paused when federal marshals suggested bringing in the nun from St. Catherine's as mediator. Her reputation, built on 2 deaths and 1 act of mercy, was preventing violence she never witnessed. She accepted Father Gabriel's offer on a morning when spring rain drummed against the chapel roof, and the garden smelled of wet earth and possibility. The conditions she demanded were simple. She would choose when to engage. Jesse would accompany her as apprentice, and St. Catherine's would remain sanctuary untouched by federal operations. Father Gabriel agreed to all of it. Her first assignment came in midsummer, a mining camp called Silverton Gulch, where company hired guns faced off against independent prospectors over disputed claims. 3 men already dead, massacre looming. Sister Abigail rode in with Jesse and Marshal Wade Brennan, a grizzled veteran who had known her reputation from the old days. The camp was tense with barely contained rage men on both sides armed and angry, waiting for the spark that would ignite slaughter. She walked into the center of the camp alone, Winchester slung across her back but not in her hands. Visible, present, not threatening but impossible to ignore. The company gunman, Vance Holloway, laughed when he saw her. A nun. They sent a nun, but one of the miners, a young man who had heard the stories, whispered urgently to his leader, Dutch McCarty. That is the St. Catherine's nun, the one who killed 2 men in 2 shots. The laughter died. In its place came calculation, assessment, the realization that this old woman in her gray habit was not decoration, but warning. Sister Abigail forced both sides to negotiate, not through threats, but through simple moral arithmetic. You can fight and die for dirt and metal, or you can live and share until federal survey determines legal claims. Your choice. The camp chose life. No shots fired. Both sides walked away, diminished in pride, but alive to see another day. Jesse watched in awe as they rode back to the convent. You did not even touch your gun. That is the point. Sister Abigail's voice carried satisfaction mixed with weariness. The gun is last resort. Legend is first defense. But what if someone calls your bluff? Then it is not a bluff anymore. 3 months later came the test of that promise. 4 young women, 16 to 22 years old, held captive by a trafficking ring led by Marcus Webb. Local marshal had insufficient men. Sister Abigail was asked to intervene. The planning took 2 days. Sister Abigail studied maps, calculated angles, developed a strategy that relied on deception more than firepower. Wade and Jesse would pose as buyers. She would provide overwatch from 250 yards. If things went wrong, she would have clear shooting. Things went wrong. Webb spotted the deception when one of the captive girls recognized Jesse from town. Suddenly, weapons were drawn, a knife pressed to a 16-year-old's throat, chaos erupting from carefully laid plans. Sister Abigail, watching through her rifle scope, faced an impossible choice. Webb stood in the open, an easy shot. But the man holding the knife was farther moving with a hostage in the line of fire. Military training said, take the sure shot. Conscience demanded she save the girl. She chose conscience, the longest shot of her life, the most impossible, but the only one that mattered. The bullet traveled 250 yards, adjusted for wind and angle, and the terrible mathematics of preventing murder. It struck the knife wielder's wrist, shattering bone, sending the blade flying. The girl fell free unharmed. The rescue ended without deaths. Webb and his men surrendered. 4 lives saved, 0 lives taken. As they rode home, Jesse was jubilant. You did it. You saved her without killing anyone. Sister Abigail stared at her hands, still trembling from adrenaline. 50, Jesse looked confused. What, I just shot my 50th person? But this time he lives. She met Jesse's eyes. That is the difference. That is the harder path Mary Grace wanted me to walk. 2 weeks after the rescue, 3 priests arrived at St. Catherine's. A church tribunal sent to investigate allegations that a sister had violated her vows through use of violence. Father Thomas Reed led the investigation, conservative and stern. Father Miguel Santos brought pragmatism. Father Daniel Beck showed sympathy. They convened in the chapel, examining evidence, hearing testimony. Reed presented the case for expulsion. 2 dead at the convent, military records of 47 prior kills, continuing use of firearms. How could such actions be reconciled with vows of peace? Sister Abigail stood before them, knowing her future hung in balance. I will not apologize for protecting innocent lives, but I will explain my understanding of the vows I took. She spoke for an hour, articulating the philosophy she had been forming since Mary Grace's death. That peace was not passivity. That protection sometimes required force. that the vow she had taken was to serve life, and sometimes serving life meant stopping those who would end it. Character witnesses followed. Jesse spoke of being spared, of lessons learned, of transformation from coward to student of restraint. Caleb Stone, brought from his work release, testified to redemption, granted to second chances that changed the course of a life. Marshall Wade described conflicts, prevented lives, saved violence, avoided through her mere presence. When Sister Abigail gave her final defense, her voice carried the weight of 49 souls and the seeds of something new growing from that dark soil. I was the angel of death, 47 lives taken in service to my country, 19 years of killing. Then I met Sister Mary Grace, who taught me that hands which take life can also give it, that violence can transform into protection, that the hardest path is not refusing to fight, but knowing when fighting is truly necessary. She paused, meeting each priest's eyes in turn. I have killed 49 people. I remember every face. I have planted 49 roses, one for each soul. Every night I pray for them. Every morning I tend those flowers. That is my penance. That is my transformation. But I have also saved hundreds, not by refusing to defend them, but by exhausting every option before raising my weapon, by building a reputation that prevents violence before it starts, by teaching others the Guardian's Creed: protect the innocent, exhaust alternatives, and if you must kill, carry that weight forever. The vote was 2-1 for acquittal. Father Reed voted to expel. Santos and Beck voted to keep her with conditions. She must report use of force, seek peaceful solutions first, and teach others her path, spreading the philosophy of restraint. Sister Abigail accepted all conditions. That night, she sat with Jesse under the stars, teaching him what she had come to call the Guardian's Creed in its complete form. 3 rules. Protect the innocent. Exhaust alternatives before violence. If you must kill, do it clean and carry the weight forever. Jesse made his promise, then swearing to value mercy, to walk away when possible, to fight only for those who could not fight for themselves. Sister Abigail placed her hand on his head in blessing, seeing in him the future she hoped to build. A generation that understood strength without cruelty, protection without excess, justice tempered by mercy. Winter returned, bringing with it the final test. Red Hill Raiders. 12 men led by Jackson, Red Jack Tully, burned their way through the valley. Word spread they were heading for St. Catherine's. Father Gabriel urged evacuation. Sister Abigail refused. This is sacred ground. I will defend it. But you cannot fight 12 men alone. I am not alone. Over the previous months, bonds had been forming. Caleb had been quietly organizing. Jesse had been recruiting. The community had been watching. And when Red Jack's threat became known, they responded. She prepared the convent with Jesse and Marshall Wade. Barricades, shooting positions, evacuation plan for the other sisters. They braced for siege. Red Jack arrived at dawn, mocking the defense. 12 of us, 3 of you. Bad odds, sister, for you. The words hung in cold air. Then, like a miracle built on months of trust and reciprocity, riders appeared on the ridge. Caleb Stone leading 8 reformed mountain men, men he had helped find work and purpose through the federal program. Dutch McCarty bringing miners from Silverton, men whose lives had been saved by her negotiation. Townspeople Sister Abigail had helped over the months, small kindnesses repaid in steel resolve. Even the 4 rescued women, bringing supplies and determination, born of gratitude. 28 defenders. 12 raiders. Red Jack's smile faded as he calculated new mathematics. This changed everything. Sister Abigail walked to the front alone, Winchester visible but not raised. You can ride away now, or fight and die here. Choose. Red Jack looked at his men, seeing doubt replace certainty. He looked at the defenders, understanding they fought not for pay but for loyalty. He looked at Sister Abigail and saw in her eyes the cold certainty of someone who had chosen restraint 49 times but would choose violence if forced. Not worth it, he turned his horse. Move out. The raiders left. No shots fired. Violence prevented not through fear but through community, through the bonds Sister Abigail had built, one merciful choice at a time. The celebration that followed was subdued but genuine. Caleb approached as others dispersed. You built this. Community. Protection without violence. Sister Abigail watched the sun set over the valley she had defended. I did not build it. Mary Grace did. I just tend her garden. She would be proud. Maybe. The years that followed brought change measured in seasons and lives touched. St. Catherine's expanded. A school for frontier children, a clinic, training grounds where Jesse taught tracking and survival to those who would become peacekeepers. Jesse Hart grew into his role marrying Emma Finch, having children, training 47 men and women in the Guardian's Creed. None of them ever fired their weapons in anger. 47 peacekeepers to balance 47 deaths. The mathematics of redemption calculated in lives preserved rather than taken. Caleb Stone completed his sentence, earned full pardon, led programs helping others walk the path from violence to purpose. And Sister Abigail aged into her role as teacher, as guardian, as the living embodiment of mercy that cost nothing less than everything. The frame narrative returned on a winter evening in 1904. Sister Abigail, now 84, finished her story as fire crackled and snow fell beyond the windows. Sister Sarah Mitchell sat stunned, trying to reconcile the frail old woman before her with the legend described. That is why the Winchester hangs above the altar, to remember that even tools of violence can serve peace. Sister Abigail's voice remained strong despite her years. I have not fired it in 29 years, but its presence protects this place, because people know I could use it but choose not to. That choice makes the restraint meaningful. Sarah looked at her hands, seeing in them the same potential for death and healing that Sister Abigail described. I killed 32 people in Apache campaigns. I cannot sleep, cannot pray, cannot forget their faces. Sister Abigail rose slowly, walking to the window. I planted 49 roses, one for each soul. She turned back to Sarah. Every night for 30 years I have prayed for them. Every morning I tend the flowers. It does not take away the pain, but it transforms it into something. You do not carry them alone anymore. She led Sarah to the memorial garden, visible even in darkness. Rose bushes wrapped against winter, but alive beneath. In spring, they would bloom again, as they had for 3 decades, life persisting through death's season. I am more than my count. Sister Abigail said it softly, as if trying to convince herself as much as Sarah. And so are you. Tomorrow, Sister Sarah Mitchell would plant her first rose. 32 seeds for 32 souls. And in planting them, she would begin the same long walk toward peace that Sister Abigail had walked before her. The garden would grow. The community gathered the next day for St. Catherine's 30th anniversary. Townspeople, reformed outlaws, peacekeepers, families whose lives had been touched by the old nun's particular brand of protective mercy. Jesse Hart, now 50 years old, stood before them with 3 children at his side. He spoke of transformation, of how a terrified boy had been taught to choose the harder path, how that choice had shaped everything that followed. 47 peacekeepers trained. 47 people who never fired in anger. That is Sister Abigail's true legacy. Not the 47 she killed, but the 47 who learned from her restraint. The toast that followed embarrassed Sister Abigail, who slipped away to Mary Grace's grave as celebration continued. She knelt in snow, old knees protesting, and placed fresh roses she had somehow kept alive through winter. I kept my promise as best I could. She spoke to the stone, to the memory, to the part of herself that still needed absolution. I chose the harder path. It cost me, but it also saved me. She touched the gravestone with fingers gnarled by age and work and the weight of decades. Your garden grew, not just roses, people, community, hope. Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving. I will keep tending it, as long as I can. She rose slowly, joints cracking, and walked back toward the convent. Through the window, the Winchester was visible above the altar, gathering dust, now untouched but not forgotten. A reminder, a promise, a symbol of power held in check. The snow fell heavier as evening approached. Sister Abigail stood at the chapel door, looking back at the celebration inside. Jesse's children laughing, Caleb sharing stories with young peacekeepers. Sarah sitting quiet, beginning to understand that transformation was possible. The community she had protected and built and served flowering like roses from hard ground. The narrator's voice her own, but younger, rose as if from memory. They called me Angel of Death, Guardian, Legend. But I was none of those things. I was a woman who killed, then learned to build, who took lives, then saved them, who discovered the hardest battle is not against enemies, but against yourself, against the easy choice, against violence that comes too naturally. Mary Grace once told me, grow life, not graves. I planted 49 roses, one for each soul, and in doing so I finally grew my own. The image faded not to black but to spring years later, showing the memorial garden in full bloom. 49 roses yellow and white surrounding Mary Grace's stone, and beside it a new marker, simple and clean, Sister Abigail Thorne, 1820 to 1909. She chose the harder path. The view pulled back, revealing St. Catherine's Convent, still standing, expanded and thriving, a testament to protection without cruelty, strength without excess, and the possibility that even hands trained to kill could learn eventually to heal.